The time is at hand.
From the land between the crackheads in Williamson, West Virginia, you're in Dark Places. My name is Junebug Fugit. I'll be your tour guide. Still struggling to find a way to record the show. I'm in the house right now, in the studio. Everyone's asleep. I'm probably going to wake them up. And at any moment now, my rooster is going to start crowing. And there's always loud vehicles driving by and everything. It's very aggravating. And there's going to be some stories from the parking lot at work. Sorry about the audio. I'm working on it. Florida cops wrangle creepy clown by Tim Banal. A wild piece of police body cam footage shows the moment when Florida cops wrangled a creepy clown who had been called in for trespassing at a shopping center. According to a local media report, the weird incident occurred earlier this week in the city of Palm Bay, and a video of the bizarre bust shared on social media by the community's police department. An officer can be seen approaching the clown, who was clearly committed to the bit, as he was dressed in full-body costume that bore an uncanny resemblance to the iconic Ronald McDonald. Upon informing the man that he was not free to leave because he had previously been trespassing by the plaza, the encounter quickly escalated into an altercation. Fortunately, the scuffle was short-lived as the cop managed to bring the defiant man down to the ground, where he was handcuffed despite considerable resistance. In an amusing exchange, after the clown had been placed in the back of the police cruiser, the officer observed, "You look like a clown," to which the suspect angrily responded, "I am a clown, stupid." A subsequent search of the man's bag, which had been left behind when the tussle erupted, revealed a rather odd surprise: several additional clown costumes, multiple red noses, and a flare gun. It is uncertain if the colorful extra attire was intended for other individuals or simply spare duds for the curious character who now finds himself in trouble with the law. Only in Florida.
This episode of In Dark Places is sponsored by the Slinky. The Slinky is a helical spring toy invented and developed by American naval engineer Richard James by accident in 1943 and successfully demonstrated at Gimbel's department store in Philadelphia on November 27, 1945. It can perform a number of tricks, including traveling down a flight of steps end over end as it stretches and reforms itself with the aid of gravity and its own momentum, and appearing to levitate for a period of time after it has been dropped. These interesting characteristics have contributed to its success in its home country of the United States, and it has inspired many popular toys with Slinky-like components in a wide range of countries. So, thanks, Slinky!
It's Slinky, for fun it's a wonderful toy. What walks downstairs with honor and pairs and makes a slinkity sound. A spring, a marvelous thing. Everyone knows it's Slinky, it's Slinky, for fun it's a wonderful toy. It's fun for a girl and a boy. It's fun for a girl and a boy.
Get a Slinky in a size and color you like, in metal or plastic.
Now, who wasn't singing along to that? Back to you, Junebug.
Hey, thank you, Jimmy Haunted. Jimmy will be back a little later. This week on the show, Dogman. You know him, you love him, you can't live without him. Dogman. And just so we're clear, most people hate the term Dogman. I'd rather call it a werewolf. For some weird reason, the term Dogman kind of stuck on the internet, and we all just have to deal with it now. Dogman is a cryptid described as a bipedal, canine-like creature with a man's torso, first sighted in 1887. It is often associated with folklore and has gained popularity through various sightings. Just in case you're new around here.
I saw a dogman / werewolf as a kid. I am now 31, living in Romania. I never told anyone because I got laughed at when I was a kid. It was the night before Christmas. I was at my grandparents' house with my parents and my brother. They were saying that I should be nice, otherwise Santa wouldn't come. I was looking up at the window because I loved looking at the night and the dark. It was so cool. Remember, I had to be 6 or 7 years old. And he came with his face up at the window. I was face to face with him. I froze in terror. His eyes were so human. Big head and long wolf-like mouth. He was very tall, at least 1.80. And I don't know which metric system that is. He looked at me and was growling like he was so angry. And then he was going to the door outside the house. My mom shouted to get away from the window, and I ran to lock the door inside the house. But he just left, going around the house. I don't know why he left. I told my parents, and they said I was just seeing things, or that I was just dreaming, and that it was just a wolf and nothing to be scared of. Pretty sure that it was no simple wolf. Does this sound like a Dogman sighting? Well, let's see. I had a very strange experience several years ago that I've never known how to classify. I was out walking in the evening, and it had gotten dark. Small town, Ohio. And I was in a neighborhood with houses everywhere. I saw movement between two houses, no more than 15 to 20 feet away from me. And I figured it was a person, so I looked up. This thing was about 7 feet tall and shaped like, well, nowadays I would describe it as the shape of Professor Lupin when he turns into a werewolf. But back then, that movie hadn't came out yet, so I had no frame of reference. I don't know what that movie is. We gotta look into that. Side note, when the movie did come out and I saw that scene, my head about exploded. If I saw any finer details, fur, facial features, etc., I don't remember. I stopped in my tracks and I watched this thing cross the yard and disappear into the shallow shadow cast by the eave overhang of the house. That shadow was maybe 6 to 8 inches deep at best. I was so confused and waited for it to pop out onto the porch or something, thinking the disappearing was some kind of optical illusion and that it would reappear, but it didn't. It had just walked into the side of the house. I have never in my life felt a terror response like I felt seeing that thing that night. It didn't seem to notice me, thank God, but holy crap. Does this sound like a possible Dogman sighting? Or something else? I don't know. Kinda, yeah. Never knew of them to disappear like that, though. It's kind of different.
The Werewolf / Dogman of Monterey Hills, Los Angeles. Before I get into my story, here's some background information. Okay? Good. Every day, usually after finishing homework, or if I was just bored and had nothing to do, I'd take my dirt bike on a run to the nearest grocery store, which is about 3 miles away from where I live. To get there, I had to bike through one-way streets that snaked throughout the secluded neighborhoods of the area. All the houses in these neighborhoods look surprisingly upper middle class, which was strange considering my neighborhood, which was just down the hill, looked nowhere near as rich. But I didn't mind it too much, focusing more on how quiet and peaceful the drive through the streets was. To get to these streets, I had to chug my bike up multiple hills, which was a bit of a drag since my bike did pretty badly uphill. But taking these streets was safer than taking the main roads. This happened on the 15th of last month, and I don't know, this was 4 months ago, so you do the math. It was a Friday, which meant that I could stay up late and play my video games. My friends from school, whom I typically played with, weren't online, so I had nothing to do. In the mood for some chocolates, I decided to take a nighttime bike ride. My ride to the grocery store was normal. I parked my bike, got my chocolates, and headed back. Since it was nighttime, I decided to take the normal streets, since there weren't many cars on that road. As I exited the normal streets and began my descent down the one-way streets that cut through the secluded neighborhoods, I noticed a car following close behind. The guy's headlights were cranked all the way up, which reflected through my bike's side mirrors, blinding me through my helmet. I decided to pull over and let the guy pass. And, by the way, how annoying is that? Those LED headlights. We've discussed this before. This thing should be outlawed. I stopped my bike behind a car parked in front of a house. Like all the houses on the block, the lights inside were cut off. So I wasn't worried of the owner of the house seeing me and thinking, why was that suspicious biker just sitting behind my car? Also, I was wearing all black, so I wouldn't be surprised if someone could mistake me for someone shady. I was probably sitting on my bike for about a minute, waiting for this guy to pass, but his car hadn't turned the last corner. I didn't see any headlights coming back down the road, so I figured he wasn't coming. Before I continued on my way, I decided to take in the night air. I flipped open my visor of my helmet, took a deep breath. I turned off my bike's motor. It may sound like I'm sugarcoating this, but once I turned off the motor, the entire area fell dead silent. All that could be heard were the faint chitterings of crickets and the wind blowing through the trees above. I just sat there with my head up to the sky, my eyes closed, and my arms limp at my sides. It was so peaceful. All of a sudden, the distracting pitter-patter of footsteps came within earshot. Turning toward the footsteps, I noticed they were coming from across the street. The footsteps didn't sound like a typical person's. They sounded much heavier. Suddenly, I saw a tall black figure emerge from behind a garden hedge in front of a home across the street from me. Whatever this thing was tall and fast. If I had to estimate how tall it was, I'd say it was nearing the 7-foot range. At this point, I was frozen with fear. The only part of me that moved was my head, as I watched the figure run down the driveway of the home, and run the opposite way from me, across the street. But as the figure crossed the street, the moonlight illuminated it, giving me a somewhat clear view of it. It looked like a stereotypical depiction of a werewolf. Sharp claws, bent legs, mangy fur, pointed ears, a toothy muzzle, etc. Basically, just a wolf-human hybrid. My heart sank. The creature disappeared in the shadows, cast by the homes across the street. But I could still hear its heavy footsteps as I grew further and further away. A minute passed, and then another. I was left sitting on my back, confused and frozen in fear. I didn't want to move, let alone turn on my bike's motor and alert everything in the area where I was. But I had no choice. I got on my bike, and at that instant, I turned on my bike's motor and sped off. The ride back was a blur. All I remember was me zooming down the streets. I definitely was not going the speed limit. Nevertheless, stopping at stop signs. I just had to get out of there as fast as I could. Thank God this thing didn't see me hiding in the darkness. The second I got home, I told my parents the whole thing. Of course, they didn't believe me. I looked up on my computer tonight if it was a full moon, and to my horror, it was. I didn't get any sleep that night, fearing that the thing followed me home and was stalking me through my window. I'm getting chills as I write this. I've kept this story a secret from my friends, as I know if I tell them they would think I was crazy. We don't think you're crazy. We believe you. This is the first time I've talked about the story in full. I've been hit by a truck, bitten by a pit bull, and almost drowned. But this is by far the scariest thing I've ever encountered. I haven't gotten on my bike since. Imagine that if werewolves did live in or near Los Angeles, the area where I live, Monterey Hills, would be the best place for them to hide, as it's on the outskirts of everything, and each neighborhood is surrounded by empty hills.
Holy mackerels. Here's a Dogman story for you. Hey, y'all! I wanted to share the story of my Dogman sighting, and yes, I am doing so on a throwaway account. I have told a few of my friends, and they have mostly said I must have misidentified whatever I saw. I felt the need to tell my story in a place where at least I know there are some other skeptics like myself, so here it is. I was staying in the Catskill Mountains in New York State for a few days. I had booked an Airbnb with my girlfriend where we could bring our dog, a 100-pound German Shepherd. The Airbnb was a strange RV that was expanded into a cabin. The place was far away from any other houses and on the side road, basically on the side of a mountain overlooking an amazing view. The place had 2 fire pits. One was right next to the cabin, and the other was about 800 feet away on top of a hill. That sounds like fun. The last night we were there, we were having one last fire in the faraway fire pit. The fire pit had a great view of the mountain range, cornfields on one side, and the other side sat up against the wood line. We had our dog off the leash, he is very well-mannered, and we were playing some music on a Bluetooth speaker. Our dog kept looking towards the wood line, and it was freaking my girlfriend out. We would occasionally turn the music off and just listen to see if we could hear anything. I also had a small LED flashlight and would scan the woods with it, looking for any animal eyes it picked up. Well, after a little bit of this, my dog jumped up to his feet and started full force aggressively growling at the woods, which is very out of character for him. Just when I was getting up and turning the music off, my dog darted at the woods, maintaining his high alert status. He juked left, and I heard something take only a few steps back in response. I was able to call him back to me right away, at which point he crept back, keeping his eyes locked on this creature. As my girlfriend held our dog's collar, I stepped closer into the woods with my flashlight and small knife in hand. As I was scanning the woods, my flashlight picked up on a set of eyes, which now looked and sounded a lot further back than we had heard the steps. The eyes were glowing like a dog's eyes in the light of my LED flashlight, but the height is what threw me off. It was too tall to be any animal I would expect to see, a raccoon, coyote, skunk, etc. I figured it was a black bear. Although black bears are very skittish to people, and especially dogs, unless protecting their young, so it wasn't adding up in my head. I sat there for a solid 3 or 4 minutes, trying to focus on what this was. The eyes also didn't look like a bear. It looked like a crouching dog. I was lost in my curiosity, and my girlfriend went into almost shock, put the music back on, and said, "We're getting out of here and going inside." I kept telling her to turn the music off and start walking back to her without turning from the woods, but I wasn't going to stay out there alone. She started dragging our dog back to the cabin, and my dog and I had our eyes fixed on the woods. As soon as my flashlight went off the creature, it started following alongside of us in the wood line. The footsteps I heard sounded like a person walking in the woods, and as it followed us, I could hear at least 2 separate sets walking near it in the woods. We got inside the cabin and locked the door and shut all the blinds and were completely freaked out. I spent the next hour or so listening and watching out the window, hoping the animal would walk into the spotlight off the cabin so I could identify it. I never saw anything step out, but the footsteps continued walking around back there behind the cabin in the woods. I stepped out of the door about an hour or 2 later, but heard nothing and searched with my flashlight. Whatever I heard that night was not afraid of my dog, and I have never seen my dog act like this. My dog will chase rabbits and even deer without making a sound. Luckily, he always comes back to me when I call him. I have spent a lot of time outdoors in my life and have always been able to identify any animal encounters. I have asked a lot of my hunting friends about this and asked what if any animal would react like this and not instantly run away from a dog of his size. The mystery of not knowing is what creeps me out the most. I have never heard of Dogman at the time, so it didn't even cross my mind during the sighting until I started researching crouching dog sightings online. My girlfriend hates to talk about whatever I saw and what we heard that night, so I am here presenting my story as a hopeful skeptic. Huh. Back to you, Junebug.
Encounter in Hartford County, Maryland. 10/18/21, midday. Shout out to Amber. On Monday, October 18th, 2021, midday, I took my 7 and 2.5-year-old sons to a state park, a mile and a half up the road from my house. Rocks State Park, Hidden Valley area. The park is small, 4 parking spots and a half-mile trail that follows a creek. The trail ends at a fork in the creek with a beachhead, about 20 feet long. 6 people would be a crowd. Both of my sons are familiar with this park, as it is in a rotation of 3 parks we choose from to go on a little hike once a week. The trail is moderate with some inclines, natural obstacles, and occasional narrowing due to lack of maintenance. My eldest son is comfortable being 30 to 50 feet ahead of me while I pace my youngest. Nothing is out of the ordinary, just a normal hike. My eldest reaches the beachhead 15 to 20 seconds before us. We approach the creek beach, and my youngest is on my left, starting to mess with rocks and throwing them in the creek. My oldest is 10 to 15 feet to my right, messing around, throwing rocks in the water. I bend down to cuff my pant leg and hear a blood-curdling scream from my eldest. I look up at him and he is screaming, falling backward, feverishly kicking his legs. I follow his line of sight across the creek. Perched on a large flat rock is an animal I could not understand. It is no more than 20 to 25 feet away, and its dimensions seemed so large it looked as if it could leap the creek in one stride. A barrel chest, with clear defined pectoral muscles, shoulders and biceps, no different than a man, just a lot bigger, bulging eyes and a stubby snout, like a hyena. It looked as if it was in a sprinter's starting position, not an animal on all fours. Its thighs and hind end were noticeably large. The mass of this animal was unnatural. The ears faced forward, with hair tufts on the sides and tops of his head. The face looked as if it was on high alert, similar to when your dog has quick head movements because you're getting ready to throw a ball. It kept switching between my son screaming, falling backward into the trail, running away, and me screaming, picking up my other son, as I am frantically trying to get between it and my first son. It almost looks as if it's in a lunging position. That or backing up. My perspective was head on before turning into the trail. I get to him and we are out of direct sight. I yell at son number 1 to run. The weirdest thing would happen. The 7-year-old would start sprinting and crying, and after 30 feet, he would turn around almost in a complete daze and not understand what's happening. And then I would have to yell at him again to run. He would run, cry, stop, dazed. This happened 3 times. I still don't understand how shock or fear could do that. The animal did not follow us down the trail. The thoughts going on through my head, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies. It was the only time in my life where I knew I couldn't protect my children. The buck knife on my hip was no better than a pillow. The moment I told my 7-year-old he might have to take his younger brother's hand and get back to the car as fast as you can, has left a scar deeper in my mind than this unexplainable animal. I was laser focused on my surroundings and what it was. None of my emotions distorted my vision or made me misinterpret my surroundings.
Michigan Dogman encounter. It was the winter of 2021. I was walking with 2 of my friends. We had went down a trail. It was pretty wet from dissolved snow, but we went on, and it was pretty dark. But we were walking back from a party that we went to, and as we walked, we could feel the sensation of something with sinister intentions watching us. As we walked on another trail, we turned on a slight path that took a turn into a wide tree line. As an indigenous and black person, I didn't want to go in there, but my friends insisted. So we went into the tree line. We saw something that would almost get us killed. A large, muscular man, but also a dog with large amounts of drool and slobber, stood around 7 or 8 feet tall. His hands were as big as a pillow. It had large knife-like talons, nails, or claws. We had stopped dead in our tracks, and I ran with all the strength and speed I had. And as I ran, I heard big thumps, like 10 meters behind me. My friends ran the opposite direction, but I didn't care. I never looked. But as I ran, I heard my friends' blood-curdling screams as the beast ran toward them. I ran until I stopped, and looked back, and I seen the beast running as fast as a car. I ran and ran until I found my aunt's house. I haven't seen my friends in 3 years, and I still haven't went on that trail ever again. So did the Dogman get your friends? You haven't seen them. Oregon Dogman encounter. It was September of 2021. I was on a camping trip in Oregon. It was about an hour away from Klamath Falls, which, ironically and infamously, seems to be a hotspot for cryptid sightings, especially the Dogman, though I wouldn't discover this until much later. My encounter took place just off the lake of the woods area, on the Aspen Point campground side. The Lake of the Woods was in walking distance from me, no more than a few miles. To get to the lake from the camp, however, it required that I cut through a small clearing and then a walk through a patch of forest. During the day, the lake was beautiful. Every day for the 4 days I was there, I spent as much time as I could sitting near the lake. It was peaceful. Strange things first occurred on my 3rd day there. I'd just come back to camp after going out with family. I marched to the lake, where I spent the next few hours. I hung around until the weather grew crappy and the sun began to set. I let it almost get too dark before I realized I was in an isolated location, with a walk through rural forest ahead of me. If you've been in a similar position, you know I was trying to collect myself, while also internally panicking as daylight burned. I began to walk. The forest was thick, however, I managed to keep my cool. The clearing was in sight, and that's when the most awful feeling came over me. You know the feeling when you can physically feel someone's eyes staring down the back of your neck? Only my someone felt more like a something. I remained frozen, like a deer in headlights, sick to my stomach, up until a few yards behind me. I heard several fallen branches crack simultaneously. I turned my head and peered into the dim woods. Nothing was there. Suspecting I'd just experienced some bad omen, panic ensued. I chose flight and raced back to camp with limited vision. Then came my 4th and final night at camp. I found myself rolling around, unable to sleep. In the dead of night, I got up, threw on some warmer clothes, unzipped my tent, and left. What was supposed to be a short bathroom break quickly turned into a late-night solo walk back to the lake of the woods. That particular night, a full harvest moon lit my path. It shone just well enough for me to make out my surroundings. Even with the brightness of the moon, I headed for the lake with no flashlight in hand. I walked in the night defiantly, the previous day still heavy on my mind. No forest monster was going to get its hands on me, I told myself. I went into the clearing and through the woods like a madman on a mission, inviting the supernatural. I inevitably reached the lake and sat down at the docks. I watched as the moonlight glistened on the water, dancing in short ripples. However, I began to notice an eerie fog rolling over the lake. While looking out on the water, something came over me. I realized something was off. I now diverted my attention back toward the trees. The sounds of the forest had gone abruptly silent now, as if in the presence of a predator. Before I knew it, a dreadful feeling came rushing in. My stomach dropped. I shined my flashlight into the darkness and heard more tree branches breaking as if something was headed toward me. Instinctively, I stopped listening to the water and started moving. I wanted to navigate whatever was happening, like one would walk on eggshells. But I ran. With my flashlight on, I booked it off the docks and into the forest. I ran, clumsily, stumbling over roots, ultimately falling and losing my light, like a scary movie. As I fell, I saw a black silhouette gunning for me. I got up and full sprinted, with only the moonlight to guide me now. Something was hot on my heels. Terrified, I managed to just reach the clearing and turn my back away from the woods. That's when I saw it. It stood up on its hind legs and watched me from the tree line. It must have been 8 or 9 feet tall, covered in matted, jet-black fur, humanoid with the head of a dog. It had lanky limbs, beady eyes, and a malnourished body. And for about 5 seconds it just watched me. I stood paralyzed for what felt like a lifetime. I watched it as it reverted to all 4 legs, ran back into the forest. To say it was fast would be an understatement. It was the quickest thing I've ever seen in my life. I truly believe it would have caught me that night if it wanted to. That's about all the creepy Dogman stories we have for you this week. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate you. Thanks as always, Jimmy Haunted. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless.